gathered at the crossroads, seeking answers in the wind.
It's good to be here to have this discussion today along the banks of the Penobscot River, the place where I grew up, where the Penobscot people have made their home for thousands of years. It was here that I first learned of my place in the world and my place in creation. One of the things that we learn very early as Penobscot people is that Penobscot is the land, it's the water, but it's also the people. We're all related, we're all interconnected. We have a term that we use at the end of all of our prayers, Indilnabamuk, which reminds us that everything that we ask for ourselves, everything that we take, everything that we use in order to sustain our lives is also connected to all other life on the planet. So when we talk about that, when we think about how we're connected to all other life on the planet, we have to think about our own usage and our own sense of responsibility toward the rest of creation. We have another term, mamabizu, which means enough. And that's a core cultural value that teaches us that in order for us to have enough, we have to ensure that everyone else has enough. Enough love, enough of the resources required to sustain life, enough safety, all of the things that are required for people to live a life of dignity. And it was here that I first learned those things. When we talk about our place in creation and how we walk upon the earth, one of the elders that I've worked with, Oren Lyon, says that when you place your feet on the earth, you're stepping on the faces of your grandchildren who are waiting to be born, and therefore we have to place our feet very carefully. That requires us to live a specific way of life. We call that way of life Skijinawe Bamausawagan, which means essentially the indigenous way of being, living in harmony with the rest of creation. And so it's important to me, it's symbolic to me that we come back to this place to have this discussion about the current state of the world today. What we're talking about here really is survival. We've come to this place right now where issues of Indigenous rights, environmental justice, racial justice, a number of issues related to inequity and human survival have all collided. We are living well beyond our means here. We are living in a way that has disconnected us from one another. One of the things that I think is most important about this time is recognizing that there's an incredible need for us to change the way that we're living. We're living in a way that has not only separated us from one another, but has separated us from the earth, the very source of our survival. We don't call the water and the air and the land resources, because those things are the very sources of our survival, and they are required in order for us to continue living here on this planet. We have this intertwined connection with those elements, and without them, our survival is not going to be guaranteed. And so when I think about all of those things in correlation to being here in this place where I learned of my connection to the land, to my community, to the water, I think about the fact that we're dealing with 17 and a half centuries of conquest. And part of that conquest ideology is this frontier mentality that encourages us to live these individualized lives, separated from one another, separated from the earth. Within those individualized lives, we waste an incredible amount of resources that are required for living. And we squander the sources of our survival. And if we want to be able to manage our movement forward in a way that sustains life, we have to go back to the beginning and remember what it was that allowed our specific humanoid species to survive when others did not. What allowed us to survive was living in community with one another, cooperating, collaborating, relying upon one another, and living in harmony with the earth. And we've forgotten those things. We've forgotten this very important element of our survival. There was a story that was told by a friend of mine who does repatriation work, which is bringing home ancestors' remains that have been placed in museums and all of these other horrific displays, and allowing them to come home and be buried with their people on the lands where they belong. And one of the messages that came through spiritually for this particular group of people as they were doing that work was the ancestor whose remains that they were bringing home told them, "We dreamed you into the future." And we have to remember that that privilege of life that was granted to us is now our responsibility for future generations. That we have to live in such a way that we ensure that our future generations can be dreamed into being, into a world that is capable of sustaining them. And in order for that to happen, we have to dramatically change the way that we live. We have been living with these excesses that are destroying our capacity to exist. It's suicidal. The way that we're living is suicidal, and it's maddening. There's a being in our mythology called Giwok, the cannibal giant. And the story of the cannibal giant is that he sleeps deep in the forest and only awakens to the cries of the Earth Mother. He wakes up when the Earth Mother's anguishing cries tell him that human beings have begun consuming faster than she can produce. They have begun damaging her faster than she can heal. And so Giwok wakes up and he joins into this greed-driven, maddening dance of society and lulls people into a false sense of safety and dances them to their destruction so that the Earth Mother can renew herself. We are in the time of the cannibal giant's dance right now, where we are dancing to this maddening tune of overconsumption, of separation from the earth, of destruction, in a way that is a threat, a very real threat to our survival on this planet. And the only way for us to put Giwok back to sleep is for us to wake up and to recognize that what we're doing to the earth, to one another, is actually inhibiting our ability to dream life into the future. We all are born from this long line of impetus of life that perpetuates itself endlessly. And now, maybe for the first time in our history, we have the capacity to eliminate that lineage of life that we come from with not only our overconsumption and our destruction of the planet, but also in the creation of weapons of mass destruction that lead us to believe that we are somehow safer if we can destroy other life. The only way to ensure that our lives are safe are to protect the lives of others, other human beings and other beings within creation. So we're operating under this illusion of safety that history has proven time and time again is false. We are warring with one another in a way that could lead very quickly to the end of life on this planet, to the destruction of all of our ecosystems. We live under the threat of a nuclear holocaust, and we have failed in all of our attempts to breach a peace with one another that's meaningful. And the reason that that is happening is because we live within a structure, within a system where war is part of the capitalist mechanism, where it is profitable, that we have wars that are being driven by this profit-driven market that completely eliminates the value of life. It completely diminishes the value of Mother Earth, and it has no valuation beyond this valuation of profitability. And so when we start thinking about all of the ways that we are deluding ourselves into believing that we're safe by creating these mass structures, whether it has to do with food or medicine or bigger buildings or stronger weapons, all of these things are an illusion. What we need to do is to simplify our lives and to remember that we're all related. We have to be mindful every day of Indil Nabamuk, that we're all kin, that, I'm connected to all of my relations, and that I have the right to live upon this earth because I take responsibility for all other life. Those two things can't be separated. We can't have a right to a specific kind of life unless we're willing to create a world where that right can be met. And we have to take responsibility for the safety and security of all other life in order to be able to have that right. And we've lost sight of that. Now we scream out for rights as entitlements without taking any responsibility for our role in the larger scheme of creation. And that's a spiritual and mental illness that we're suffering from on a large scale. And so my hope in all of this is the prophecies of my elders, which tell us that there will be a global awakening. People from all corners of the world will rise up and will unite in order to heal the earth, in order to come back together as community, as kin, that we will start recognizing ourselves within one another. We will see the eyes of our children in the eyes of other people's children. We will see our future in the guaranteed future of others. We will see our ability to continue to exist here in this beautiful place, tied to our connection to the earth and our responsibility for preserving and protecting the earth. And that is happening around the world right now. I travel all over and I've met with people from all walks of life, from different corners of the world, and this awakening is happening. So the prophecies that the elders have been telling us about for generations are coming to fruition. We are now starting to see this uprising happening. Anyone that's paying attention sees the awakening that's occurring on the planet. And so right now, things seem chaotic, they seem destructive, it seems like we're descending into darkness. But what I believe is that we are really in a birthing process. We are now in the long, dark birth canal, and there's new life emerging. And we are part of that birthing process. We're either locked into the deep, dark birth canal, terrified by the darkness, or we're standing beside the mother, assisting the birth. And I think that it's critical for all of us to recognize that right now, all of the things that we're seeing come into the light are opportunities for us to heal. The things that are happening now in the world aren't new. They're on a larger scale, perhaps, and they're being illuminated because the sun is at high noon. And what this does is it brings everything that's been in the shadows into the light. And that's a really remarkable time. That gives us this really incredible opportunity to come together as a species for the first time, perhaps, in human history, to be able to heal these deep psychic, spiritual, social wounds that we have all participated in, that we've all been complicit in creating. And so I think that this is a very exciting time, even though it's a very frightening time, because we have access to one another through social media and other means that allows us to communicate with one another in a way that we never have before on a global scale, which gives us the opportunity to educate ourselves about one another, to become friends with one another, and to recognize the interrelatedness and interconnectivity that we all share. And so I'm hopeful, despite the critical state that we're in, I'm hopeful that enough people will wake up so that we can reach critical mass, so that we can begin radically changing the way that we live, the way that we engage one another, and the way that we walk upon the earth. Because really that's the key. It's not about big, huge solutions, it's about small, localized efforts to change the way that we live in fundamental ways so that we can come back to a sense of community, so that we can come back to a sense of cooperation and collaboration and a recognition that we're all related. And that's my hope, and that's what drives the work that I do, is my belief that we can turn this around. We can make these necessary changes if we stop thinking of them as huge shifts and start thinking of them as subtle shifts within our own individualized lives in community with one another. We can radically change the way that we live if communities all over the planet start shifting away from individualized, siloed lives into more communal way of being with one another and with the earth. The change can be dramatic and it can be rapid. And my greatest hope is that we will be able to do that we will be able to recognize that our love for one another, is far greater than any of this manufactured hate that we're living under. That our sense of connectivity to one another is eternal, that it is irremovable, that nothing can really separate us from one another other than this illusion that we've been operating under, this dance of the cannibal giant, and that we have the key in our hand right now today to be able to change that by waking up and seeing each other in truth through the eyes of love in a way that allows us to begin caring for one another and the earth again in the way that allowed our ancestors to exist into the future. There are a number of ways that we can make this happen. I have some specific ideas that we won't have time to cover in depth, but we can get a sense of. We have to be willing to take charge of our energy sovereignty. We have to be willing to stop participating in the destructive energy market that's been created and start really creating energy in a way that meets our localized needs and also has a harmonious relationship with the earth. We also have to take charge of our food. We have to declare food sovereignty. We have to move out of these destructive markets that are destroying the earth, that are not solving the problems of hunger, that are actually separating us from this very essential source of our survival. And one of the ways that we can do that is to localize our food production. And that's essential because the food industry, the big agri, is responsible for some of the greatest destruction of the environment on this planet. We have to engage in educational sovereignty. We have to take back control over the education of our children, our future leaders, and move them away from these really false ideologies and educational systems that are training them to be a part of the system that's destroying us. We have to teach them to be creative thinkers again. We have to encourage them to look critically at the world in which they're living. We have to inspire them to understand their relationship to one another and to the rest of the world. We also have to start teaching on a broad scale skills of strategic nonviolence. We have to be engaged in this process of helping people to understand that violence has never throughout history kept us safe, that violence only perpetuates more violence and that it's a never-ending cycle. We have to be willing to have the courage to step away from these false senses of safety that have been created by the spin of the military marketing. And we have to be willing to take charge of these aspects of our lives that are only secured by securing the lives of others. And I think if we can start doing those things within our communities, declaring energy sovereignty, food sovereignty, educational sovereignty, and really teaching in a deep, meaningful way practices of strategic nonviolence, then we're going to be able to have a mass of people that are going to be spinning out of those structures and those systems that have a fundamental understanding of a different way of being in the world than the one that we have been living under. And that's going to be essential. We need to have a mass number of people who have the ability to live in a way that is completely different than the way that we've been living. And we have a responsibility for creating that world. We have a responsibility for creating a future that we can step into, where we can't just point and blame and judge and condemn the current systems. We have to be willing to do the work to create something different. And we have to be willing to allow for the people who are indigenous to a specific land, the people who are from there, to be able to determine for themselves what is a meaningful way for them to engage one another, the earth, and the social structures that they live under. How can they take charge of creating them for themselves? How can they create new governance systems that honor all beings that live within that system, the human beings, the ecosystems, and all other living beings that are part of that system of living. And we have to be courageous, because we have been lied to for so long under these ideologies of conquest to believe that this is the only way that we can be safe. is to be a part of this massive structure of destruction that's sweeping the planet. We have to have courage. We have to have faith in the wisdom of our own hearts. We have to have faith in each other. We have to have faith in the wisdom of creation and the earth to sustain us, to support us, to nurture us, and to protect life. One of the things that's missing, a fundamental piece of this that's missing, is a recognition of the role of the divine feminine. We have become so externalized in our actions that we've forgotten the intuitive aspects of divine heart-based wisdom that needs to guide those actions. We need to bring the two of those together again, a marriage of the divine feminine and the divine masculine energies. And the only way that we're going to be able to move forward in a way that nurtures, sustains, and protects life is to be able to achieve that marriage within ourselves, within our communities, and within the larger world around us.
Are we strong enough to live it once we do?